The soil was still fresh over my husband Jack's grave when his brother Daniel stepped toward me, grasping my hand a little too tightly. With tears still drying on my cheeks, I looked into his eyes, expecting comfort. But instead, he knelt down in front of me right there, in front of everyone who had gathered to mourn. My breath caught sharply in my throat, shock paralyzing my body as he pulled out a small black velvet box from his coat pocket. "Jessica," Daniel began softly, though loud enough for everyone around us to hear clearly. "Jack would have wanted you to be taken care of, and I promise you'll never have to be alone. Marry me." My world stopped spinning. Friends and family gasped softly around me, but all I could hear was the deafening pounding of my heart, the echo of humiliation burning my cheeks, and the sheer disbelief that someone I had trusted could violate my grief so openly, so carelessly. In that awful, surreal moment, I didn't say a word. But what I discovered later that night changed everything. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting stories. My life before Daniel's shocking proposal felt like a storybook dream, one that I had cherished deeply, never imagining how swiftly it could be shattered. Jack and I married young, barely 22, fresh out of college with bright eyes and bold dreams. Those early years were tough, but our love was tougher. We faced every challenge hand in hand, and each struggle only deepened our bond, proving to us both that our love could endure anything life threw at us. Jack wasn't perfect, but he was perfect for me. He was funny in a way that always caught me off guard, sweet enough to leave me handwritten notes by my coffee cup each morning, and protective in a quiet, gentle way. I remember countless nights when I would fall asleep against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat, confident that nothing in this world could harm us as long as we had each other. As we moved from one life stage to the next, our family grew. Our daughter Laura arrived first, a wide-eyed, fiercely independent little girl whose spirit mirrored Jack's. Then Nathan came along 2 years later, quiet and observant, more like me in temperament, but physically the spitting image of his father. Raising them was our greatest joy and our greatest adventure. From soccer games and school concerts to teenage rebellions and heartbreaks, we navigated parenting together as partners. Jack always stood by me, reassuring me when I doubted myself, reminding me of my strength when I forgot it was there. Professionally, Jack thrived as a financial advisor. His calm demeanor and empathetic nature drew clients who trusted him implicitly. At home, he was the same, stable, loving, and dependable. We built a comfortable life together, one where love flowed freely and openly. We often hosted backyard barbecues, holiday dinners, and birthday parties, filling our home with laughter, warmth, and the reassuring hum of people we loved. Daniel, Jack's younger brother by 3 years, was always a regular at our gatherings. Tall, charming, and a bit more extroverted than Jack, he often filled rooms with his booming laugh and flashy stories. Daniel and Jack had always been close, or so I thought. Daniel, being single and having bounced from relationship to relationship, frequently joked about how he envied Jack's stable life, the beautiful family, and the perfect marriage we seemed to have. At the time, those comments seemed innocent, harmless envy from a brother who hadn't found his own happiness yet. When Laura and Nathan moved out to attend college, Jack and I found ourselves rediscovering our life as empty nesters. It brought us even closer. We took long walks together each evening, holding hands, discussing future plans, travel destinations we dreamed about but postponed for family responsibilities, like Italy, Greece, and the cozy cottage in Maine Jack always talked about. Our dreams felt closer, tangible, within reach. Our bond deepened into something quieter but even more profound, built on decades of trust, mutual respect, and genuine friendship. And then, abruptly, everything shattered one seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Jack collapsed while making coffee, a massive heart attack, the doctors would later explain. No warning signs, no time to say goodbye, just sudden, cold silence that left me hollow, shocked, and utterly lost. Within hours, the life we'd carefully built over decades had vanished, replaced by empty rooms and suffocating silence. In the days that followed, grief overwhelmed me. But friends, family, and Daniel rallied around to support me. Or so I believed. Daniel seemed particularly present, stepping in with arrangements, managing guests, and handling paperwork that I was too emotionally drained to confront. At the time, I felt grateful, appreciative that Jack's brother cared enough to take charge while I grappled with the reality of Jack's absence. The funeral arrived quicker than expected, a gray day filled with quiet tears and painful goodbyes. As I stood by Jack's grave, numb from loss yet somehow comforted by the presence of family and friends, Daniel stayed close. Too close, though I hadn't yet realized it. Standing beside Jack's freshly laid grave, I still believed in the goodness around me, unaware that I was moments away from the betrayal that would shatter not only my sense of security, but every belief I'd ever held about trust, family, and love. The first moment I sensed something was wrong happened nearly a year before Jack passed away. It was subtle enough that at first I brushed it aside as nothing more than Daniel's quirky sense of humor. But it lingered uncomfortably in the back of my mind, leaving behind a quiet sense of unease. We were celebrating our 21st wedding anniversary. Jack had planned an intimate gathering at our home, inviting our closest friends and family. The house was filled with laughter, warmth, and the comforting hum of familiar conversations. Candles flickered softly across the dining table, flowers filled every corner, and old photographs of Jack and me, snapshots from our wedding, vacations, and special moments with our children, decorated the walls. Everything was perfect. Jack stood up during dinner, tapping his glass gently. The room fell silent, and I felt warmth rush to my cheeks as he began speaking. "Jessica, these 21 years have been the best of my life," he said, his voice filled with sincerity and tenderness. "Every moment, every challenge we've faced, every joy we've celebrated, I wouldn't trade them for anything. You're my best friend, my partner, the love of my life, and I hope you know just how grateful I am every single day." His words brought tears to my eyes, the gentle kind that rise from pure happiness. I smiled, squeezed his hand, and felt a wave of gratitude for the life we'd created together. As our friends cheered and raised their glasses, Daniel stood abruptly, commanding everyone's attention. Jack glanced at him curiously but smiled warmly, welcoming whatever his younger brother had to say. Daniel held his wine glass, smirking slightly in a way I'd never fully liked, a mixture of charm and sharpness that always made it difficult to read his intentions. "Congratulations to my favorite couple," Daniel began smoothly. "You know, watching Jack and Jessica has always given me something to aspire to. Jack has the perfect wife, the perfect family, and the perfect life. I can't help but envy it all." Polite laughter echoed around the table. Daniel was known for his humor and bold statements, so no one seemed to suspect anything unusual. But Daniel didn't stop there. He turned directly toward Jack, his expression oddly serious beneath the smile. "You know, Jack, if you ever decide you want out, or if, heaven forbid, anything ever happens to you, just know that Jessica wouldn't have to look far to find another husband. I'd be more than happy to step in and pick up where you leave off." His comment hung in the air. My smile froze awkwardly, my heart giving a strange, uncomfortable twist. Around me, laughter was mixed with surprised gasps, a few whispers and uncertain glances. Jack hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected jab, but Jack, always diplomatic and kind, quickly laughed it off, patting Daniel on the shoulder. "Careful, Dan," Jack joked, easing the tension with practiced charm, "or I'll think twice before inviting you to our next anniversary." More laughter broke out, diffusing the moment, but my discomfort lingered. I met Daniel's eyes briefly, expecting him to acknowledge his inappropriate joke, but he only stared back at me, his gaze penetrating in a way that sent chills down my spine. There was something there, something that felt almost possessive. A chill settled in the pit of my stomach, though I couldn't fully explain why. Later that evening, after our guests had gone home and the house was quiet again, I mentioned my discomfort to Jack. He brushed it off lightly, reassuring me in his gentle way. "You know, Daniel," he said softly, wrapping his arms around me. He's always trying to be funny. Sometimes he misses the mark. I wanted to believe Jack's explanation, wanted to trust that Daniel had just made a misguided joke and nothing more. But even as I smiled and nodded in agreement, a nagging feeling persisted, gnawing gently at my subconscious. It was subtle, easy enough to push aside, but it stayed with me, a faint whisper of doubt, planting the seed of unease deep within my heart. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's remark faded slowly from my mind, overshadowed by life's demands, family responsibilities, and happier moments with Jack and the kids. But every now and then, in quiet moments, the echo of Daniel's voice and the intensity of his gaze resurfaced, whispering quiet warnings I struggled to silence. I had no idea at the time how prophetic Daniel's joke would become, or how painfully close it was to the truth that would soon unravel our family and the life I'd always believed was safe. Over the months that followed Daniel's unsettling joke, I tried to bury my unease beneath everyday routines, family commitments, and the comforting presence of Jack. But as much as I wanted to dismiss that subtle red flag, small incidents began piling up, each quietly chipping away at my confidence, my sense of belonging, and ultimately my identity. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was gradual, slow enough that I almost didn't notice the erosion happening until I was already neck-deep in emotional quicksand. It started innocently enough with small comments from Daniel, scattered lightly into conversations, as if they meant nothing. He'd stop by our home unexpectedly, sometimes joining us for dinner, making himself comfortable as though our home was his. Daniel would compliment the meal, saying, "You know, Jess, Jack's lucky he married a woman who takes such good care of him. If anything ever happened, he'd never find another woman who'd put up with him the way you do." On the surface, his remarks seemed harmless, but beneath the friendly teasing was an undertone suggesting that my worth was tied entirely to Jack, almost as if I was disposable without him. Each comment settled deep into my subconscious, weakening my confidence in subtle ways. I began questioning myself. Was I really only valued as Jack's wife, the quiet supporter in the background? Was I just invisible without him? Jack, preoccupied with work and dealing with a stressful promotion, often missed these exchanges entirely, always assuming Daniel meant no harm. I began feeling isolated, not knowing how to voice these subtle discomforts without sounding overly sensitive. After all, Daniel was family, and Jack adored him. How could I accuse him of undermining me? The erosion continued quietly. Daniel's visits grew more frequent, and he increasingly inserted himself into our lives. Once, during a gathering with neighbors, Daniel casually mentioned how I wouldn't survive a day without Jack's guidance. Everyone laughed lightly, assuming it was a joke, but the words felt heavy, lingering in my chest. Jack squeezed my hand reassuringly, smiling and shaking his head, oblivious to the hurt Daniel's words had caused me. Gradually, I felt like I was becoming invisible. During family discussions, Daniel would speak over me, gently dismissing my ideas, subtly encouraging Jack and even our children, Laura and Nathan, to doubt my judgment. At times, I'd catch my daughter Laura glancing uncertainly at Daniel, silently checking for his approval before acknowledging my thoughts. That hurt more deeply than anything else, to feel my own child turning to someone else first, leaving me sidelined in my own family. Soon, even at home, my voice began fading quietly into the background. Decisions I used to make confidently now became group discussions orchestrated by Daniel, who skillfully guided the family toward his opinions, even the simplest choices. Vacation destinations, dinner menus, household routines started to reflect Daniel's preferences, while mine slowly faded away, unnoticed. Jack, too busy and distracted by work, never seemed to notice the shift. If he did, he assumed I was simply tired or quiet, not realizing that my silence was born from emotional fatigue, from the deepening sense of irrelevance I felt within my own family. Then came a particularly painful moment during a casual Sunday dinner at our home. Daniel arrived unexpectedly, joining us at the table. Midway through dinner, I shared a personal accomplishment, finally finishing a painting I'd worked on for months. I was proud of it, eager to share this small victory. Daniel chuckled lightly, shaking his head as he glanced at Jack. You see, Jack, your wife really does have a lot of free time. I envy how relaxed her life must be. Jack chuckled lightly, missing the dismissive jab in Daniel's words. Nathan and Laura glanced briefly at each other but said nothing, probably sensing my hurt but not knowing how to intervene. I sat silently, humiliation burning beneath my skin. Daniel had once again managed to make something I cherished seem trivial, unworthy of respect. That night, as I lay in bed next to Jack, the isolation felt overwhelming. Tears quietly rolled down my face as I wondered how I'd become so invisible, how I'd let my value become defined solely by Jack's approval or Daniel's sharp commentary. It was as if I was slowly vanishing, disappearing into a shadow of the woman I used to be. In those quiet moments of pain, I desperately wanted to reach out, to Jack, to anyone, but I didn't know how to explain the intangible feeling of being slowly erased. Instead, I buried it deeper, hoping it would fade on its own. Little did I know that the quiet erosion of my self-worth was only the beginning. That soon Daniel's subtle undermining would escalate into a humiliation so devastating it would forever alter the life I thought I knew. The moment of humiliation that finally broke my carefully guarded composure happened at the most vulnerable time in my life, Jack's funeral. That day was already filled with unbearable sadness, loss, and grief, but Daniel found a way to deepen my pain, quietly shattering my dignity when I least expected it. The funeral service had ended and close friends and family gathered back at our home for the reception. I was emotionally drained, feeling as though I'd been hollowed out by the reality of Jack's absence. I moved through the house mechanically, nodding weakly to condolences offered, the endless stream of sympathetic smiles and comforting touches becoming blurred and meaningless. Eventually, needing a brief moment alone, I slipped out of the crowded living room and into the hallway, desperate for quiet. As I leaned against the wall, eyes closed, gathering the strength to face the guests again, I overheard voices drifting from the kitchen nearby, familiar voices that instantly froze me in place. Daniel was speaking to our close friends, including two couples Jack and I had known for years, Tom and Olivia, and Mark and Sarah. His voice carried easily through the open doorway, relaxed yet authoritative, the way Daniel always sounded when holding court. You know, Jessica's going to be completely lost now, Daniel said, his tone filled with feigned concern. Jack was her entire life. Without him, she has no direction, no clue how to manage things on her own. A murmur of polite agreement followed, but Daniel wasn't finished. I honestly worry about her. Jack always made all the important decisions. I just don't think she's capable of handling this on her own, emotionally or practically. I stood frozen, disbelief choking the air from my lungs. My face burned hot, humiliation prickling beneath my skin. Daniel, the person I had assumed was supporting me, was instead undermining me in front of the very people whose respect I valued most. He was quietly, confidently erasing my dignity in a matter of moments. She's fragile, Daniel continued smoothly, the words slicing through me like a blade. I know it might seem quick, but honestly, I'm going to have to step in to handle things. I'll take care of her. Otherwise, she'll fall apart. He chuckled lightly, and I imagined his familiar, easy smile that always won people over. There was no mistaking the subtle authority in his voice, the way he had positioned himself as my savior, convincing everyone around us that without his intervention, I would crumble. "Oh, Daniel, you're such a good man," Sarah responded, her voice sympathetic and admiring. "Jessica's lucky you're willing to step up. She's always seemed a bit delicate to me." Delicate. The word hit me with shocking force, reducing everything I'd ever accomplished, the family I'd raised, the strength I'd quietly held through life's ups and downs, to nothing more than a fragile, helpless victim. I desperately wanted to step into that kitchen, confront Daniel, and defend myself, but something stopped me. A combination of raw shame and overwhelming grief left me paralyzed, speechless, powerless to fight back. I felt utterly humiliated, stripped of the ability to defend myself in front of those who had known me for years. Daniel had expertly reshaped their perception of me, and in that painful instant I realized the quiet damage he'd inflicted over months had succeeded. Just then, footsteps approached. Laura stepped into the hallway, her face softening with relief when she saw me. "Mom," she said gently, unaware of what I just overheard, "everyone's asking about you." My heart broke further as I realized that even my own daughter seemed to see me through Daniel's distorted lens, fragile, incapable, needing care. I forced a smile, silently choking back the tears threatening to spill down my face. "I'll be there in a moment," I whispered weakly, unable to meet her eyes. Laura nodded hesitantly, sensing my distress but uncertain how to handle it. "Okay," she said softly, turning back to the crowded living room, leaving me alone once more. In that painful solitude, I felt utterly humiliated, stripped bare of dignity and respect, diminished in the eyes of those I cared about. Daniel's quiet betrayal wasn't just a personal attack. It had reshaped my entire identity in the eyes of the people who mattered most. I felt suddenly small, invisible, and desperately alone in my own home, mourning not only Jack, but the person I'd always believed I was. As I stood there trembling, absorbing the painful reality of Daniel's betrayal, something hardened within me. A quiet resolve began to form beneath the humiliation. I didn't yet know how, but I knew one thing for certain. Daniel had underestimated me for the last time. But even as this realization began to form, I had no idea the depth of betrayal still awaiting me, or how soon I would be forced to face an even darker humiliation, one that would force me to walk away forever. After the funeral, things moved quickly, but not in a direction I expected. I thought I would have time to grieve, to sit with my sorrow and figure out how to navigate life without Jack. Instead, I found myself being quietly displaced, emotionally, financially, and socially, by the very person who was supposed to be helping me heal. Daniel started showing up more often, but now with a subtle shift in tone. He wasn't just helping, he was taking over. He insisted on managing Jack's accounts, saying it was too overwhelming for me to deal with. When I expressed discomfort, he reassured me like I was a child, saying, "Jess, I know this is too much right now. Just focus on getting rest. I'll take care of everything." At first I resisted, but then I began second-guessing myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I too tired to make good decisions? The truth was, I was exhausted. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating. The loss of Jack felt like a weight pressing on my chest day and night, and Daniel knew that. He used it. I started noticing more things slipping out of my hands. Appointments were made without me. Bills were paid through accounts I hadn't touched. Jack's lawyer stopped calling me directly and began going through Daniel. Our kids, Laura and Nathan, were both leaning on their uncle more and more. He painted himself as the one holding the family together. And the worst part? I let him. Not because I trusted him anymore, but because I didn't have the strength to fight. Then came the final blow. It was about 2 weeks after the funeral. Daniel asked me to sit with him in the living room. His demeanor was oddly formal. Laura was there too, sitting quietly across from me, her face tight with anxiety. I could already feel something was wrong. "Jess," Daniel began, folding his hands like some kind of benevolent businessman, "I think it's time we talk about what's next. You can't live in this house alone. It's too much for you. Too many memories, too many expenses. I've spoken with the lawyer and looked into your options." I stared at him, stunned. "What do you mean? My options?" "I mean," he said gently, "I think it would be best if you took some time away. Maybe stayed with your sister for a few months. Let me handle the estate, the house, the finances. I can make sure everything stays in order while you regroup." I looked to Laura for support. She didn't meet my eyes, she just stared at the floor. "You want me to leave my home?" I asked, barely able to form the words. "No one's forcing you," Daniel said, smiling slightly. "But I think it's what Jack would have wanted. You need peace right now. This place, it's not healthy for you. And honestly, there are a lot of complicated matters that need to be handled. You shouldn't be dealing with all this stress." I felt the walls closing in. This was the same house. Jack and I had built together. Every corner of it held memories. The kids' height marks on the kitchen wall, the garden Jack had planted after his mother died, the living room where we danced on our anniversary, barefoot and laughing like we were still in our 20s. This wasn't just a house. This was my life, my history. And now I was being told it was too much for me. What struck me most wasn't just Daniel's manipulation. It was how quickly my family had fallen in line behind him. Laura wasn't fighting for me. Nathan hadn't called in days. Friends weren't checking in like they used to. Everyone had bought the story. I was fragile. I was grieving. I needed to be managed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, completely still. Something inside me felt like it cracked, not from rage, but from the quiet, soul-deep realization that I had been erased, not by strangers, by the people I once loved and trusted. That night, I packed a single bag. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't need permission. I left a note. Nothing dramatic, just a simple line. I'm not broken. I just need space. Please don't contact me. Then I walked out the front door. I didn't look back. Everyone assumed I was running away, that I was too fragile to face the world without Jack. But they were wrong. I wasn't running. I was reclaiming what little of myself I had left. And soon, I would discover something that would turn everything they thought they knew upside down. I didn't go to my sister Leona's house like Daniel had suggested. I didn't call my kids. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I took the bag I packed and drove for hours until I reached a small, nondescript coastal town 2 states away, a place Jack and I had once visited in our early years together. Back then, we said we'd come back someday. I never thought I'd return alone, with no plan, no clarity, and nothing but grief clawing at my chest. I rented a modest room at a worn-down inn just off the main road. It wasn't much, stiff sheets, flickering hallway lights, and the faint scent of mildew in the walls. But it was quiet, anonymous. No one knew me there. No one asked questions. And in that silence, for the first time since Jack died, I could finally hear myself think. But the silence didn't bring peace. It brought pain. In that tiny room, I unraveled. Everything I'd held together for weeks, the polite smiles, the small talk, the nods of gratitude for casseroles I never ate, finally collapsed. I cried for hours, for days even, until my throat was raw and my body ached from holding in too much for too long. I wasn't just mourning Jack. I was mourning the life I thought I had, the people I thought were in my corner, and the woman I had been before I allowed myself to become invisible. I skipped meals. I slept during the day and wandered the beach at night, bundled in Jack's old sweater, breathing in the salt air and wondering what it would feel like to disappear completely. There were moments, dark, terrifying moments, when I questioned whether I even wanted to keep going, not in the dramatic way people might assume, but in the slow, quiet kind of grief that makes even brushing your teeth feel pointless. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the realization that I had become so completely dependent on others, on Jack to make the big decisions, on Daniel to handle the mess he created, on my children to validate my role as mother, that once they were gone, I didn't know who I was anymore. I was 60 years old and didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. My hair, once neatly styled, hung limply around my face. My skin looked pale, tired. My clothes didn't fit right. I looked like someone who had given up. And for a while, I had. There was a coffee shop down the street from the inn. On the 3rd morning, I walked there in wrinkled clothes, hoping for something hot to hold in my hands. The girl behind the counter smiled, asked my name, and when I hesitated, she said gently, "You don't have to tell me. I'll just write, mystery lady." I almost cried right there at the counter. That small act of kindness from a stranger, something so simple, pierced straight through the numbness. I sat by the window with my coffee and stared out at the gray waves crashing against the shore, and I began writing. Not anything profound or structured, just thoughts, memories, pain, questions. I scribbled onto napkins, receipts, the margins of a newspaper, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely adrift. But make no mistake, I was still at rock bottom. I had no contact with my family. I hadn't spoken to my children. My bank account was dwindling fast. I had no job, no purpose, and no plan. I was living off the last bit of cash Jack had tucked into an envelope in our emergency drawer. Money I had grabbed without thinking before I left. One evening, I watched a couple walking hand in hand down the beach. Their laughter was soft, intimate. The man tucked a strand of hair behind the woman's ear, and she leaned into him without thinking. I turned away quickly, the ache in my chest almost unbearable. That had been Jack and me once. It felt like another life now. That night, I returned to the inn and sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking. I reached into my bag, pulled out Jack's old journal, the one I always teased him about for carrying on our trips, and clutched it like a lifeline. I hadn't read it yet. I wasn't ready. But something about that night, something about the silence, the ache, the sheer emptiness, told me it was time. And as I opened the cover and saw the letter from Jack's lawyer tucked neatly inside, a strange, quiet pulse of electricity ran through me. My fingers trembled. My heart pounded. I hadn't vanished completely, not yet. Something was waiting for me inside those pages, something that would change everything. I didn't open the journal immediately. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes, just holding it in my lap, staring at the cracked leather cover. It smelled like old paper and aftershave, a scent that made my chest tighten with longing. Jack used to write in it late at night, when he thought I was asleep. I'd tease him about it sometimes, calling it his secret life, and he'd just chuckle and say, "Some thoughts aren't meant to be spoken out loud." Now I realized those thoughts were all I had left of him. When I finally opened the first page, my breath caught. Jack's handwriting was familiar, looping and careful, but there was a new heaviness to it. The entries weren't long. Some were just a paragraph, others only a sentence. But each one pulled me deeper into his mind and revealed a truth I hadn't been prepared to face. It started months before his heart attack. Jack had been worried, not just about work or health, but about Daniel. At first, the entries seemed vague. "I don't trust the way Daniel looks at her. I've seen it more than once. Told Daniel not to speak to Jessica that way again." He laughed it off, but I saw the edge in his smile. He asked what would happen to Jess if something ever happened to me. Brushed it off like a joke, but it didn't feel like one. My heart started to race. The more I read, the clearer it became. Jack knew. Maybe not the full extent, but he'd sensed something was deeply wrong. Something predatory in the way Daniel had begun orbiting our life, circling closer every month. Jack had tried to protect me, but he'd done it quietly, without alarming me. Then, tucked between 2 pages, I found the envelope. It was addressed in Jack's handwriting. Just my name, Jessica. Inside was a letter and a second, smaller envelope, sealed and marked, "For lawyer only." I unfolded Jack's letter with shaking hands. It was dated just 2 weeks before his death. "My Jess, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hate that I didn't tell you these things in person. But I didn't want to worry you. I've had this strange feeling in my gut for a while now, not about my health, but about Daniel. He's not who he used to be. He's been pressuring me to let him into our finances, asking questions about the will, about the house, about you. I don't want you to panic, but I've made some changes. The lawyer knows. If anything happens to me, Daniel has no legal access to our estate. You're protected, Jess, fully. I moved assets into a trust in your name. The kids are included, but Daniel is not. I also gave the lawyer a sealed letter for you. He'll know when to deliver it. Please don't let him make you feel small. You've always been the strongest one between us. You just forget sometimes. Take care of yourself. Find your voice. You deserve peace. I love you. Always. Jack." I clutched the letter to my chest, overwhelmed by a wave of grief and then something else. Relief. Vindication. Strength. Jack had seen what I couldn't. He had believed me, even when I hadn't known I needed believing. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't imagined Daniel's intentions. Jack had left me a map, a way out, a way forward. The second envelope contained detailed instructions, written with the kind of precision Jack was always known for. It listed our attorney's name, The law firm, account details, and a signed document indicating the transfer of control over our assets to me and our children, with a very specific clause. Daniel was to have no authority, claim, or access to anything. If he attempted to insert himself, the lawyer had been instructed to block him immediately. As I read, something began to shift inside me. The broken woman who had been wandering the beach at night, unsure of her place in the world, began to fade. In her place, a different version of me began to rise. Someone steadier, sharper, quieter, but no longer silent. Jack hadn't just protected me with love, he'd protected me with strategy, with foresight, with trust in who I truly was, even if I had forgotten for a while. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the day Jack died. The next morning, I packed my things, checked out of the inn, and drove straight to the lawyer's office listed in the letter. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't call Laura. I didn't call Nathan. I was done explaining myself. I wasn't walking back into my old life. I was about to rewrite it on my terms. I stepped into the lawyer's office just after 9 a.m. It was tucked in a brick building downtown. Nothing flashy, but solid and quiet. The kind of place where serious things happened behind closed doors. I was still wearing the same cardigan I'd left home in weeks ago. Jack's letter tucked tightly into my coat pocket, my fingers curling around it like a lifeline. The receptionist looked up from her computer and smiled politely. "Can I help you?" I took a breath and said, "I'm Jessica Marlowe. My husband Jack passed away. He told me I'd find something here." Her expression changed immediately, like someone flipping a switch. She stood up. "Yes, one moment, please." Minutes later, I was sitting across from Mr. Clay Weston, a quiet, silver-haired man with gentle eyes and a voice that carried weight without needing to raise. He pulled a file from a locked cabinet and placed it between us. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said softly. "Jack was a good man, a thoughtful one. He wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was tight. I watched as he opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one, copies of the trust, the amendments to the will, the protections Jack had put in place just weeks before his death. As Mr. Weston walked me through them, something in me shifted, like I was waking up after a long, foggy sleep. Jack had done more than just leave me money. He'd restored my dignity. He had ensured that Daniel couldn't touch anything. Not the house, not the accounts, not even my children's inheritance. The trust was ironclad. My name was on everything. I hadn't lost everything after all. I'd only been led to believe I had. As Mr. Weston spoke, I realized how deeply I had been manipulated. I thought I had nothing, no options, no voice. But that wasn't true. Daniel's power over me wasn't legal. It was emotional, and that spell was finally broken. When I left the office, I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I drove straight to a small motel off the highway, rented a room with a working phone, and started making calls. First to a financial advisor Jack had once mentioned, someone he trusted, then to a woman I knew from church, a former real estate agent who now worked with widows starting over. I called a tech support line and had help resetting every password Daniel had likely touched. I set up new accounts, rerouted funds, and canceled access to shared systems. It was slow, methodical work. Quiet. But every step made me feel stronger, clearer. For the first time since Jack's death, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I was choosing. I stayed in that motel for 3 days. During the day, I made phone calls, built a paper trail, took notes. At night, I wrote in a notebook I bought from the gas station next door. Long, honest reflections about what had happened, about what I had allowed, about what I would never allow again. The shame began to lift. I wasn't weak for grieving. I wasn't naive for trusting Daniel. I was human. I had loved deeply, and when that love was ripped from me, I reached for what was familiar, someone I thought was family. I had wanted to believe the best in people, even as they slowly erased me. But not anymore. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized myself, but for the first time, that wasn't a bad thing. My eyes looked sharper, my jaw firmer. I wasn't smiling, but I didn't look lost. I looked awake. That same afternoon, I went shopping for new clothes. Nothing fancy, just a decent blouse, a pair of jeans that fit, and shoes that weren't worn down at the heels. I cut my hair at a walk-in salon down the block. The stylist asked if I'd just gone through a breakup. I smiled and said, something like that. By the time I left the motel, I was no longer the woman who had stumbled into that inn weeks earlier, dazed and drowning. I didn't have everything figured out, but I had a plan. I wasn't going to confront Daniel just yet. I wasn't ready to be seen. What I was ready for was silence. Not the silence of grief, the silence of strategy, because from now on, every move I made would be deliberate, every step calculated. He thought I vanished because I was broken. He was wrong. I vanished because I had finally remembered who I was. There's a certain kind of strength that doesn't come with loud declarations or grand gestures. It's the kind that grows in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, when no one's watching. That's the kind of strength I found in the weeks that followed. I didn't go back home. Not yet. I wasn't ready to walk into the same house where Daniel had taken over my life, or to face Laura and Nathan, when I wasn't sure what they believed about me anymore. What I needed first was control. Not just over my finances, but over my story, my presence, my future. And I knew that if I went back too soon, they'd still see me through the lens Daniel had painted. Fragile, grieving, unstable. So I moved in silence. I rented a furnished apartment under a different name using the trust funds Jack had secured. It was small, just one bedroom and a tiny kitchen, but it felt like mine. For the first time in years, I had a space where no one had an opinion, where no one interrupted my thoughts, where every decision was mine and mine alone. I hired a lawyer, not Jack's, not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed someone new, someone neutral. I wanted fresh eyes on the paperwork Daniel had handled after Jack's death. Within a few days, I had confirmation. Daniel had attempted to gain legal authority over the estate. He'd pushed for emergency control of assets under the claim that I was mentally unwell and too emotionally compromised to manage affairs. I wasn't shocked, just cold, steady. He'd actually tried to have me declared incapable, but thanks to Jack's protections, the attempt had failed. The trust structure Jack created had blocked Daniel at every turn, but no one had told me that. Daniel had let me leave believing I had nothing, when in fact I still owned everything. The betrayal still stung, but now it fueled me. My lawyer helped me reclaim control. Officially and fully, we reissued documents, changed account access, filed protections that made it impossible for Daniel to touch anything going forward. I requested a forensic review of all financial activity after Jack's death. I wanted a paper trail, not for revenge, but for truth. For the moment I would one day need to speak with my children and show them everything in black and white. I also started documenting everything. I wrote down the timeline, from Jack's first suspicions in his journal to the day Daniel proposed at the funeral, to every conversation I remembered in painful detail. I gathered names, dates, accounts, records, not because I wanted to take Daniel to court, not yet, but because I knew men like him. They gaslight, they twist facts, they make people question what they saw. I wanted to be prepared for every lie he might tell. During this time, I stayed completely off social media. No posts, no messages, no updates. I knew people were talking. Laura had texted me once, simply, "Where are you?" I didn't respond. Nathan called a few times too. I let it go to voicemail. I needed time to decide how I would come back, because when I did, it wasn't going to be as the grieving widow they'd pitied and patronized. It was going to be as the woman they never saw coming. In the evenings, I took long walks around my new neighborhood. I met no one, spoke to no one. I listened to music Jack used to love, old jazz, soft piano, and I let myself feel everything. The anger, the heartbreak, the slow rebuilding of self-worth that comes when you stop asking for permission to exist. I started cooking again. Small meals at first, then full recipes from memory. I bought a journal and wrote letters to Jack, some filled with love, others with frustration, but always honest. He had given me the tools. I was learning how to use them. I even got a part-time job at a local bookstore. Nothing big, just a few hours a day shelving, organizing, helping customers. But it reminded me that I had value outside of anyone's approval, that I could start over on my own terms. Every day I moved with intention. Every choice was a step toward rebuilding, not the life I once had, but the life I now deserved. I didn't tell a soul what I was doing, because the most powerful moves are the ones no one sees coming. And when I did return, when I finally stepped back into their lives, it wouldn't be to ask for space or understanding. It would be to take back everything that was already mine. It started small, imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. A blocked access code here, a legal letter there, quiet disruptions that Daniel couldn't trace back to me, but that slowly unraveled the illusion of control he had so confidently wrapped himself in. First, he tried to access the estate's financial portal, the same one he'd told everyone he was managing on my behalf. The login was denied, twice. Then a notification went to my lawyer instead of him. He must have thought it was a glitch at first, but it wasn't. Then came the accounts. Funds he assumed were frozen or under review had been fully transferred to a secure trust. My trust. Automatic payments stopped going through. Cards tied to the household account were declined. His name was quietly removed from all remaining shared documentation. Daniel started calling people, lawyers, financial advisors, even Jack's old colleagues, trying to figure out what had changed. But the doors he once walked through so easily were now closed, locked, and he didn't have the keys anymore. Laura reached out to me again. This time she left a voicemail. "Mom, Uncle Daniel says something weird is going on with the will. He said there might be fraud or tampering. Are you okay? Should we talk?" I didn't respond. Not yet. Let him guess. Let them all wonder where I was and what I was doing. The attorney handling the trust called to inform me Daniel had requested a copy of the estate paperwork under the guise of clarifying Jessica's intentions. The request was denied. Legally, he had no right. That part of the message made me smile for the first time in weeks. For the first time since Jack's death, I could feel it. The asterisk shift. Asterisk. The weight that had once been dragging me down was now pressing on Daniel's shoulders, and he didn't know who had placed it there. That's what terrified men like him the most, losing control without knowing how or when it had slipped away. I imagined him pacing around my living room, rifling through drawers, checking the mail, calling every contact he had, trying to find the crack in the system that had locked him out. I imagined him realizing too late that this wasn't a system error or a clerical mistake. It was me. He had underestimated the woman he'd tried to erase. And now he was learning, slowly, painfully, that I hadn't vanished. I had gone silent so I could asterisk move. Asterisk, and soon I would no longer be invisible. 2 months after I disappeared, I returned. Not with fireworks or drama. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't shout. I simply walked through the front door one Tuesday afternoon while Daniel was in the middle of a call. The look on his face when he saw me, equal parts confusion and fear, was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I'd ever had. "Jessica," he said, standing up like he wasn't sure if I was real. "Where have you been? We've all been worried." I held up a hand, calm, steady. "Save it." He shut his mouth. "I know what you did," I said, setting a stack of documents on the coffee table. "You tried to take control of Jack's estate. You told people I was incapable, that I needed you to handle things for me." He opened his mouth again, probably ready to spin a story. I shook my head. "I have the trust, the accounts, the legal logs, every lie, every request, every denial, all documented. I don't need a confession, Daniel. I just need you to leave." His face reddened. His words sputtered into silence. "Jess, you're upset. You've been through a lot. No. You've been using my grief as an excuse to take what was never yours. You manipulated my children. You humiliated me. And now it's over." For a moment, he just stood there, his jaw clenching, his mind racing to come up with something to say. But there was nothing. He knew it. I saw it in his eyes. He didn't have power anymore. Without another word, I walked past him and into the kitchen. My kitchen. I put on the kettle like I had 100 times before. The house smelled the same, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like it was *mine* again. By the time I turned around, Daniel was gone. No scene, no resistance, just silence. The kind of silence that settles after a storm clears. And for the first time since Jack's death, the house was still, not empty, just peaceful. It started small, imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. A blocked access code here, a legal letter there. Quiet disruptions that Daniel couldn't trace back to me, but that slowly unraveled the illusion of control he had so confidently wrapped himself in. First, he tried to access the estate's financial portal, the same one he'd told everyone he was managing on my behalf. The login was denied, twice. Then a notification went to my lawyer instead of him. He must have thought it was a glitch at first, but it wasn't. Then came the accounts. Funds he assumed were frozen or under review had been fully transferred to a secure trust, my trust. Automatic payments stopped going through. Cards tied to the household account were declined. His name was quietly removed from all remaining shared documentation. Daniel started calling people, lawyers, financial advisors, even Jack's old colleagues, trying to figure out what had changed. But the doors he once walked through so easily were now closed, locked. And he didn't have the keys anymore. Laura reached out to me again. This time she left a voicemail. "Mom, Uncle Daniel says something weird is going on with the will. He said there might be fraud or tampering. Are you okay? Should we talk?" I didn't respond. Not yet. Let him guess. Let them all wonder where I was and what I was doing. The attorney handling the trust called to inform me Daniel had requested a copy of the estate paperwork under the guise of clarifying Jessica's intentions. The request was denied. Legally, he had no right. That part of the message made me smile for the first time in weeks. For the first time since Jack's death, I could feel it. The shift. The weight that had once been dragging me down was now pressing on Daniel's shoulders, and he didn't know who had placed it there. That's what terrified men like him the most, losing control without knowing how or when it had slipped away. I imagined him pacing around my living room, rifling through drawers, checking the mail, calling every contact he had, trying to find the crack in the system that had locked him out. I imagined him realizing too late that this wasn't a system error or a clerical mistake. It was me. He had underestimated the woman he'd tried to erase, and now he was learning, slowly, painfully, that I hadn't vanished. I had gone silent so I could move, and soon I would no longer be invisible. 2 months after I disappeared, I returned. Not with fireworks or drama. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't shout. I simply walked through the front door one Tuesday afternoon while Daniel was in the middle of a call. The look on his face when he saw me, equal parts confusion and fear, was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I'd ever had. "Jessica," he said, standing up like he wasn't sure if I was real. "Where have you been? We've all been worried." I held up a hand, calm, steady. "Save it." He shut his mouth. "I know what you did," I said, setting a stack of documents on the coffee table. "You tried to take control of Jack's estate. You told people I was incapable, that I needed you to handle things for me." He opened his mouth again, probably ready to spin a story. I shook my head. "I have the trust, the accounts, the legal logs, every lie, every request, every denial, all documented. I don't need a confession, Daniel. I just need you to leave." His face reddened. His words sputtered into silence. "Jess, you're upset. You've been through a lot. No. You've been using my grief as an excuse to take what was never yours. You manipulated my children. You humiliated me. And now it's over." For a moment he just stood there, his jaw clenching, his mind racing to come up with something to say. But there was nothing. He knew it. I saw it in his eyes. He didn't have power anymore. Without another word, I walked past him and into the kitchen. My kitchen, I put on the kettle like I had 100 times before. The house smelled the same, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like it was mine again. By the time I turned around, Daniel was gone. No scene, no resistance, just silence. The kind of silence that settles after a storm clears. And for the first time since Jack's death, the house was still, not empty, just peaceful. I thought the confrontation would be the end of it. I believed that once Daniel left, I'd finally have closure. But poetic justice has a way of writing its own ending. And it came not with vengeance, but with truth. About 2 weeks after Daniel left the house, my attorney called with an update. I expected it to be routine, maybe some final paperwork or another form to sign, but his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "We received a response to our forensic request," he said carefully. "There's something you need to see." He sent the files over that afternoon. What I read stunned me. Daniel hadn't just tried to manipulate the will or the estate after Jack died. He had been trying to interfere before Jack passed. According to flagged bank activity and logged email trails, Daniel had made multiple attempts, some subtle, others bold, to move assets into joint accounts under his name. He had even reached out to a separate attorney behind Jack's back, posing as Jack's proxy, trying to gain early access to trust information. But the part that chilled me most was the timeline. Jack had updated the trust and written that letter to me within days of Daniel's final attempt. Jack knew. He saw the danger, and he'd acted just in time. The full report painted a clear picture, not just of greed, but of premeditated deceit. Daniel wasn't a grieving brother trying to protect his family. He was a man who saw an opportunity in his brother's vulnerability and tried to take it all. I sat with the evidence for a long time, the weight of it pressing into my bones. I could have taken it further, filed charges, gone public, exposed everything, but I didn't. That kind of justice would have been about making noise. Instead, I let the quiet power of the truth do its work. I forwarded the report to my children. No commentary, no drama, just the truth. And then I waited. A week passed before I heard from Nathan. He called just after midnight. "Mom?" His voice was thick with guilt. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," I said softly. Then Laura called. She was crying before she even said hello. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I believed him. I let him speak for you. I didn't even ask if you were okay." I didn't say anything for a while. I wanted to be angry. I had been angry. But more than that, I had been erased. And that was something they would have to sit with, not me. "You don't have to explain," I finally said, "but you do have to remember what it felt like to forget me." The weeks that followed were quiet. Laura began texting every few days. Small things, recipes, memories, photos of Jack I hadn't seen before. She never asked to visit, but I could feel the question building. Nathan sent me a handwritten letter, something I didn't expect. In it, he wrote not just about Daniel, but about his own guilt, how he'd watched me shrink and hadn't stepped in, how he thought silence was the same as respect. Then, one Sunday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was Laura. She looked older somehow, not physically, but in the way people do after they've seen the truth and had to live with it. "I don't want to make excuses," she said, standing awkwardly on the porch. "I just want to know if you'd be willing to talk or not. I'll understand either way." I opened the door. We sat in the kitchen where Daniel once dismissed me in front of friends. Only this time, no one interrupted. No one spoke over me. Laura apologized, genuinely, tearfully, and I listened. I didn't rush to forgive her, but I also didn't hold it over her head. I could see she'd learned something, not just about Daniel, but about me. Later that evening, Nathan called while Laura was still there. I put him on speaker. We laughed, hesitantly at first, then freely. It wasn't a full return to the way things were. That version of our family was gone, but what was left, what was growing now, felt honest, real. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to be seen to feel worthy, but I welcomed their presence, because this time, I was no longer seeking a place at the table. I was the one setting it. A few weeks later, I found myself standing alone in the garden behind the house, the one Jack used to tend with quiet devotion every Saturday morning. His tomatoes had always grown too tall, spilling out of the cages like they had something to prove. The rosemary bush was still there, wild and overgrown, just the way he liked it. I ran my fingers through the leaves and inhaled deeply. The scent hit me like a memory I hadn't realized I missed. Jack. His presence. His steadiness. The life we had built. Layer by layer, season by season, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. It didn't hollow me out. I had returned to this place with more than grief. I had returned with clarity. The silence I had once feared had become my sanctuary. In it, I had heard the truth about Daniel, about my children, and most importantly, about myself. I wasn't the fragile woman they had imagined, the grieving widow too broken to stand. I was still standing. And more than that, I was rooted. I had found something deeper than closure. I had found peace. Not because everything was fixed or perfect or even fair, but because I had reclaimed what had been mine all along. My voice, my worth, and the right to take up space in the world without asking permission. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed one of Jack's wind chimes stirring in the breeze. It had been silent the entire time I'd been gone. Now it played a soft, lilting tune, almost like a goodbye, or maybe a welcome back. I sat on the old wooden bench and let the wind wrap around me. I was no longer the woman waiting to be chosen. I was the woman who chose herself. This story didn't end with revenge or triumph. It ended with something far more powerful. Peace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you've ever felt invisible, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.